Thank you very much, Mary.
Welcome.
And you've now opened up for a larger discussion, but already in the chat, we've been fascinating questions. So I'm going to ask Marcus Kisoon, our outreach assistant, to manage this process for us. So we will have, I think we try to respond to the questions in the chat, but I think there may be an opportunity for a few persons to ask their questions in person. So Marcus, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Just we're leaving the options open for those who may not want to speak. They could use the chat, and for those who may want to voice their concerns, their questions, their comments, they could raise their hands. By no means will there be prejudice in how I select persons who raise their hands. I will just select based in the order that is shown on my computer. So again, no prejudice there. There were a couple of comments actually, and I just wanted to raise them. One, Jonathan wanted to get the data around the Caribbean having the largest number, and if we could share that in the chat, or if one of you on the panel could say where that data is located. Also, Thierry from um, CCOT asked, how can a child help a child? I think that's a really good question. I think there's a nice loaded question if anybody wants to answer. Dr. Dabri?
I'm gonna ask Dr. Dabro if she could respond first.
Right, well, I can't. And I guess this is why it's a research project, because there is no way that we're asking 3-year-old and 5-year-old children to do the work of adults. You know, we have to remember that adults have a duty of care to children. Children deserve protected childhoods, protected environments, and it is up to the adults to provide those. So we do not want to see any adults abdicating their responsibility. But by the same token, if I refer back again to that 12-year-old girl who said, you guys aren't doing enough, we have to empower younger people in age appropriate manner to do what they can in age appropriate manner. But by no means are we indicating that a 5-year-old child can take on a 260-pound man. No, no. We're
If
looking
I
for age appropriate behavior and safety precautions above all.
If I may add to this, that's why I was really impressed with the report from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service of how these children were calling in to report crimes of abuse against them, and that 80% of the crimes were for sexual abuse. And I found that was really an important step because these children clearly had been sensitized enough by what is going on in the society to be aware that something was wrong, that this was abuse, and that they were empowered to take actions, even if, for example, one student's child said that she was being physically assaulted by a mentally ill person in the house, but she was afraid to tell the mother. And the mother was unaware of what was happening in her own house until officers were knocking on the door. So I think that also that is a very interesting development, and I think it's something we could probably follow through on other sources because there are other units to which children can call. So I was really impressed with that.
Yes, and if I could add to that, don't forget what grooming is. Grooming is a whole science, and we normally, and it's systemic. We normally speak of grooming as the one perpetrator grooming along the one intended victim.
Mhm.
But the one perpetrator is grooming the whole family. Don't look, don't see, don't talk, mind your business. That child lies all the time. The whole family is getting groomed. And the whole patriarchal society systemically grooms us citizens to not take action, not report, don't see, don't look, take what you need and shut up. So all of these things we have to unravel. It's a big job for sure.
We have some other questions, Doc. I also just wanted to add, I like the fact that the model incorporates an accountability framework. I think that is quite crucial in the way in which adults see their responsibility and take responsibility for children's issues. And it was nice to see that highlighted. We have two questions. One being, what are some of the psychological explanations for bystander complicity? That's one. And another one is, how can we help to negate myths and false beliefs about sexual abuse that contribute to the blindness around such harm?
You asking me?
I'm asking anyone. It's
Because
open.
I don't know.
It's open out there if anybody has a response.
Hi, everyone. This is Tisha Nickenig, calling from Philadelphia. I was associated with the Break the Silence project. It's nice to see some names and faces that I've worked with over the years. Just in response to that particular question, I just wanted to, we did, the Break the Silence project did look into some of the ideologies through some ethnographic work that we did. And as Hazel mentioned, you know, our findings were definitely based in gender ideologies and expressions, sexual expectations and behaviors and social norms that were based in patriarchal values, masculinity, you know, all of that we discovered through our research was in the communities that we were focused in on, really the ground underlying reasons for the social norms and kind of contributing to this bystander complicity that you're asking questions about. We certainly didn't look at the under 5 population in particular, so it's a very needed and targeted population, I think. But to answer the question of, you know, I think that does get to that question a little bit, and also to think about perhaps, because some of our recommendations coming out of the Break the Silence research project was to come up with more interventions that focused on that underlying masculinity, patriarchal values. So something to contribute.
Thank you. Awesome. So the chat is actually having a very healthy conversation. I think it's actually more healthy than what we're actually observing, you know, in person. It's interesting. But an interesting observation, Dr. Is that everyone seems to be finding an explanation or a reason behind why bystander becomes a safety mechanism, a reason for existing and being a bystander. Really, what would you tell someone who's fighting through the discomfort of wanting to be someone who helps, someone who engages, someone who intervenes? What are some of the processes around pushing through the discomfort to help and to go against being a bystander?
So your question is, if there is somebody who really wants to be actively helpful in the community, but they're nervous and anxious about repercussions against themselves, how do we help them push forward?
And from the chat, it's multiple reasons. They're fearful for their life. They have no faith in the protective service. So those barriers, you know, multiple spaces. So, but basically, yes. How do you push through the discomfort to help?
Okay, so it's not just one answer, but all of the groups in the world who are working on bystander mobilization in not only for child sexual abuse, but in not letting drunk people drive a car and so on. There are scripts, you know, that suit and on occasion scenarios that we work out and rehearse. So the training is quite precise, it's very targeted, it's evidence based. And what Sweetwater is hoping to do is arrange for the trainings in throughout the OECS and the rest of the islands as soon as we can narrow it down to a Caribbean specific approach where we take the various scenarios. You're an old granny, you use a walking stick, you're afraid of everything, and your survival is at risk. How can you possibly tackle the big guys next door? We can work through that. We can work through all of the scenarios. And not only can we, but we must, because at the end of it is a child at risk, is a child being harmed. And we want to stop every single one. So there is a whole curriculum, there's a whole pedagogy around what to say in a various situation, what's safe, and safety is always first. But there are now many allies. We're not doing this alone. We have networks of allies everywhere and people you can call, helplines. Mary has a helpline. I have a helpline. You can call and say, oh my God, next door, what to do? And you can get some very clear, simple instruction that will always put your safety first, but the child's safety firster. You know what I mean?
Yes. Thank you for that. I think hearing it out loud also helps us to really internalize it. There's also a conversation going on, Prof, where Leah Thompson is having a conversation with Petra, and Leah is saying, I've also heard from bystanders that they feel it's more important to keep the family together than to deal with the report that would potentially destroy the family unit. And Petra is saying, and that is one of the sad truths, Leah, keeping the family together over and above well-being of the hurting victim. Any comments around that?
The family is not together if there's a hurting child. The family will not stay together if there's a hurting child going unobserved. The child is there and you think that's the one. Let she grow up, let she brush it off and get on with it. Pull your socks up, don't take on that girl. You're going to forget in time. Oh boy. We're not talking about the male victims, but of those there are many. And actually, Trinidad has the most startling statistics of sexual abuse of small boys. Belize as well. Anyway, just to assure you from a psychological point of view that if there is one harmed child in a home and everyone suppresses it, the whole family is now thrown off balance and will not regain their balance until that trauma is addressed. So it's a misunderstanding of what what suppression does. Suppression doesn't work. Avoidance doesn't work in any psychological state at all. You have to face it and go through. That is the only path to redemption.
I see that there's a hand raised by RM. RM, if you would like to go ahead.
I really want to say that I appreciate the presentation and the information presented because we only become aware within the I'm talking about the education sector when they start to. And the exposure that they've had is expressed in their behavior. So it's really appreciative to see that we're looking at children at preschool and toddlers And we're not waiting until they begin school to see that behavior or to observe that behavior.
Thank you for your comment, RM.
Hazel, I just want to add that in our work, we are always guided by what is in the best interest of the child. And quite often we make the mistake that it's more important to keep the family so-called together. And that also applies in domestic violence cases where women think that they are sacrificing themselves to suffer abuse and violence for the sake of the family. It does not work. It never solves the problem. And you are right. We have to face it head on and confront the issues.
Mary, there's another thing I wanted to say to that too. You know, because those of us who have been working in the field and have realized the severity of the harm that can be caused, we have fought lots of battles in court,
Yes.
through legislation, through policy, and we know very well how to put the bad guys in jail.
Yes.
We know how to catch the bad guys, put them in jail, and you know, you want to feel that something's been done. We did it. But you know, there are lessons to learn from restorative justice, right?
Yes.
Where families can sit around the table, a perpetrator, his wife, the children, and say, some wrong has been done here. It does not have to end in a jail term.
No.
And if we hold a jail term over the heads of that family, they're going to shut down, move inside, close the door. That's the last you'll hear of it. And the child will go unhelped.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to talk about working outside of the law at all, but there are various forms of redress. There are various forms of justice. And there are many families that I know very well where if a person in the family has been harmed, they would never go to the police. Nevertheless, they would like justice for the child. And sitting around the table, a child can be heard. This is what you did. This is how you wronged me. And how could you do it? And you better make up for it. And some restoration can be provided that works.
Yes.
There is more than one route that we can take, and we need to examine what routes are available. I have to keep repeating that Sweetwater Foundation is not suggesting working outside of the law, but that we must investigate all routes possible to us within a creative, effective legal system.
I fully agree with you, because if we were to move outside of the law, we would be guilty of perpetrating, you know, similar offenses. But we need to explore possibilities, and also the approach is not always the final approach, but the intermediate ones. What can we do to offer a better solution to keep the family together and find a resolution to the violence as being, you know, executed against a child? And quite often, I know you also look at the perpetrator and you help them. And that is very important, because quite often we assume that perpetrators are bad people and guilty, and that is not always the case. There may be reasons for their behavior. Some, quite often, you and I know they are also themselves victims of similar incidents in their childhood that will never resolve.
Thank you, Mary. I want to say two things in response. First of all, if you are an adult who is having sex with a child, you are bad and you are guilty. But we can help you. You're still a human being and you still have your rights, And we can look on you with what does Carl Rogers call it again? Uh, Empathy, compassion.
Yes,
We have to give that, right? The other
yes.
thing I wanted to just say is that when I have proposed restorative justice, as I sometimes do, if it seems appropriate, people will say, "Oh my God, you mean to say you want to put that child to sit down at a dinner table across the table from the perpetrator?"
And
And
confront her.
I answer, "Well, she's sitting across the table from him every day.
Yes,
Except this time it will be with supports
yes,
and towards a resolution rather than towards the perpetuation."
yes. So true.
Dr. Dabro, your energy is awesome, especially in bringing across this information. I think you're tapping into us intrinsically by just the way you're bringing this, you're communicating. Question, could you share some of your citations or statistics with us, please? That is one of the requests from the audience. And I think that we only have like a roughly about 5 or 10 minutes again. And I kind of want to tap into a couple of the questions. I'm not seeing any more hands being raised. One is, can you be a bystander and not know you're a bystander? I think it's a really loaded question as we really unpack understanding our responsibilities. And I think there's also another question around what are the psychological harms to bystanders who are silent or complicit?
Wow, Marcus, you're asking me a whole epistle. Who is a bystander? Well, as long as you're standing by, you're a bystander. Every single one of us is a bystander every day of our life. We just have to decide what to focus on and what to do about it. I can't remember your other question. Sorry.
Is the psychological harm of being a bystander, a silent bystander, somebody who's remaining
So
silent?
violence is damaging psychologically. All violence is damaging, not only to the victims of it, but the perpetrators of it and the bystanders to it. So is it psychologically damaging? For sure.
And again, I was reminded for the sources of your statistics, Doc.
Oh, if you have access to my slide deck, the last page is a page of references.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah.
I think there's another question here. I think this will be the last one. I think again, it's really about really unpacking this culture of bystander because I'm really seeing how this is like a whole new phenomena for us because we've been teaching people about their rights and so much to me little conversation about responsibility as well. And I'm really happy to hear this conversation around what are we as members of society and what are our responsibilities. Any thoughts on the disconnect between the public outrage shown when incidents of abuse are made public, as an example shared by Prof. Reddock, compared to the complicit silence when the abuse is known within the home or in smaller communities?
Well, I'd love input from anybody else as well. But from my point of view, it perhaps boils down to personal survival. And if in your life you are dependent upon finance, shelter, food, all the basic things, hunting and gathering, basic fundamental needs, you can't dismiss those. Those are real things that people will worry about. Talking about coming out of COVID times, what we've learned is a lot of fear around food stability and incomes and so on. And people will worry themselves to death about preserving what they have so that if there is a threat to the perceived sanctity of a home, people will agitate to keep the home intact. And I think people just don't realize that if there are harmed children in the home, it's like lighting a match under a bed and watching a slow burn. I don't think people understand. So education on a societal level has to be more keen and more targeted. And for those who protest in the streets and so on, I think maybe it's less immediately personal. I think I'm welcome. I'm inviting other points of view.
Yes. Prof, anyone wants to contribute about that dichotomy that we're discussing at this point?
But if I may, I do think that I agree with his. The work of education and sensitization really creates a difference, and I think that probably accounts for the drastic increase in reporting that we have seen here in Trinidad and Tobago, where the majority of reports for child sexual abuse, for child abuse to the Children's Authority uh, are for child sexual abuse for the last few years. And we're also seeing similarly with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Services. So I think that there's a lot more accountability today. And many of the cases are reported of mothers actually listening to their children and taking them in. So I think certainly the issue is still there, and there's still a lot of work for us to do. But I think that over the last 10 years, we've seen a real increase in reporting and at all levels, and an increase in willingness to go to the police, go before the courts, etc. I think that where we have not done enough work is in the area of prevention. So I really like the work that is being done with perpetrators by Sweetwater, and I would really like to hear more. I know the Rape Crisis Society did that here, but I'd really like to see some sort of a reflection on the work with perpetrators here in Trinidad and Tobago. And on the question of children, I remember reading an article on continental Africa, and the author said that when families choose not to report, the children then bear the responsibility for upholding family honor.
Oh
And
my God.
children who
Yes.
suffered, and this whole burden of preserving family honor is placed on these children, and it's really a very heavy burden. So I think that I think we have gone a long way in the region. So I think all our work has not been in vain, but I still think that we have some way to go.
Yes. Great.
I think that's, yes, doctor, go ahead.
I can't remember who I'm responding to anymore, but to someone's question, I was thinking of climate change as a similar circumstance where, for example, people who wash clothes in a river and use heavy detergents so that the detergents float away into the sea and then kill fish. We didn't know that before, but now that we do, we're trying to ask people who wash clothes in a river to stop. And we lay a heavy trip on them. You're killing the oceans. In 6 more months, Grenada will be dead, and it will be because of you. It's a very heavy thing to put on people who will say, where you want me to wash my clothes? There's a lot that needs to be done apart from bringing the awareness to people who simply weren't aware before that this or that is a problem, this or that is wrong, this or that has a completely deleterious effect on so many others, much less what to do to make the change and when does it happen. So all of these social things are um, will take some time. But I don't know, we're running out of time. It's been too long. It's been too long. We know about child abuse and it's still going up. We have to get busier than we've been.
Thank you very much for that. I think as we open these new paradigms and push for more interventions and nuances in the interventions and research based considerations, I think even myself, who's been doing this work for some time, just having this conversation raises again discomfort in whether what am I doing, if it's right, if it's for the benefits of the children, am I keeping myself safe at the same time? What are the systems in place to get this work done? I think you've really allowed for everyone here to really sit and reflect on the quality and the kinds of things that we need to do. So I thank you very much for your contribution. And that takes us to the end of the discussion. And I now hand you back over to your chairperson, Professor Reddock, who would take us to the end. Thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for sharing and reflecting and contributing.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thanks once again to Hazel for that rich and very engaged discussion. And we now want to move on. I also want to thank all the persons who contributed, who asked questions, who discussed in the chat. And I hope that we are able to save the chat because there's a lot for us to reflect on based on the questions there. So thanks, everyone.